Awesome. Well, thank you and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining a session that's going to be about you as a human, and about what you can do to help make sure that you are well taken care of. So we're going to talk about specifically what are called psychosocial hazards that exist within the tech world. Who am I? My name is Dr. Allessandria Polizzi. I focus on workplace mental health. I've been in the HR and organizational development function for 20 plus years, and I run a company that helps organizations implement global guidelines to create healthy and thriving workplaces. And we have affiliates around the globe who come from a wide variety of industries who also help support organizations in this effort. But our focus today is really about understanding you and what you do. So I like to use the chat. Who wants to guess what % of IT feels burned out according to Forbes? Now, this is about a year old data, but if you could put something in the chat, I would love to see what you think that answer might be. Is it 10? Is it 2? Is it 100? 47, we got 40, 20, 25, 11. Okay. Those are all great numbers. The answer actually is 82%. So 82% of people who were interviewed or who were part of this study from Forbes showed that they had symptoms of burnout, and this is all IT professionals. And 62% were considering quitting their jobs because of the stress that they were under. And I'm going to talk about why in a little bit more detail. But before we do that, let's also have you grab a pen and a piece of paper or your phone. It doesn't matter. We're going to do a quick check-in and see how you are all doing. So we're going to go through about 12 questions here, and you can score your answers and see where you are at the end. All right. So on a scale from 1 to 5, how often between never and very often do you feel like quitting? You don't need to put this in the chat. This is for you to score, and you'll add them up at the end. So between 1 to 5. On a scale from 1 to 5, I don't take pride in my work. Capture that. People or issues easily get on my nerves. I feel like my workplace is toxic. Again, score to 1 to 5, very often or never. I don't have as much time to plan as I like. I seem to be forgetting things or not as sharp as I once was. I'm going to talk about this one in particular because it's part of our conversation around burnout. I don't think positively about my job. Again, scale from 1 to 5. I don't feel like I have anyone to talk to. 1 if never, 5 if very often. I feel unappreciated or undervalued. We'll talk about that one too here in a minute. 1 to 5. I can be unpleasant with people when they don't deserve it. No one's going to look at your answer, so it's okay. I feel low physical or emotional energy. I'm unclear or confused about what I need to do at work. Okay, now add those up. So the higher your score, the higher your risk of being either at the cusp of or in burnout. So, if you're in the high end, that's okay. We're gonna talk about some things that may be going on or have caused that are specific to tech teams. If you're low, that's okay too, because it's helpful to know proactively what may actually increase your risk of getting burnout. So it's good to kind of do that check-in. If you had anything that was a 5, then there are things that you want to make sure you pay attention to. All right, so we're going to talk about 6 of the known accelerants, I call them, known potential causes of burnout. Now, this is based on about 3 to 4 decades worth of research on burnout as a topic. So yes, believe it or not, this didn't just come about because of COVID. We've been researching burnout since the 70s. And so these 6 areas include our level of workload. I'll give you an example, some data there. How much we have control or autonomy over the work that we do, whether or not our values, what's personally important to us, aligns with the work being done in the organization, particularly if we have to execute against that work. So if we have to do something that is counter to our values, that can increase our risk of burnout. If we don't feel valued, if we don't feel like the work that we do is appreciated, then that can also accelerate our risk of burnout. If we lack role clarity, if we aren't sure our job versus someone else's job, handoffs, how will success be measured, especially if that goalpost changes frequently, that can put us at risk of burnout. And then our feeling of job security. And I'm going to talk about this one in a little more detail as well. In fact, what we're going to do now is I'm going to go through 3 of these 6 areas. However, there's a QR code at the end of the presentation. I have specific questions for all 6 with more details available if you'd like it. So you can sign up for that using the QR code. But we're going to go over workload, our personal values, and job security, because these are the ones, especially workload and job security, that I think have been particularly challenging in the last 6 months to a year. And so we'll talk about what that does to us from a human perspective now. So one I want to talk about is workload. So another opportunity for everyone to participate. So what percent of workers, as of this was about 6 months ago, what percent of workers were experiencing information overload at work? Go ahead and put your guesses in the chat. And this was research done by Pegasystems. So we've got 74%, 70%. Dirk is feeling it with the 87%. So according to that research study from Pegasystems, 90% of people feel like they have too much information coming in to be able to manage it. Let me give you context for that. 100 years ago, the amount of information that we take, well, let me say that differently. The information we take in one day today is the equivalent to what we took in 100 years ago in our entire lifetime. So our brains have evolved to take in a certain amount of information, and we are taking in exponentially more information than our brains evolved to be able to handle. So the feeling of overload, overwork makes sense because that's a big difference, right? It wasn't designed to take that load. Okay, values. One thing that a lot of psychologists talk about is if we know what we stand for as individuals, it can help us navigate some of the biggest challenges that we may face in our lives, including those that happen at work. And so meaningful work can correlate to higher engagement, higher commitment, but it also helps us make sure that we are aligned with the work we are executing against. When there's conflict, it can cause a lot of overwork, stress, and put us at risk of burnout. But I want to talk a little bit about job security. So if you or if someone in your circle in the last year, it can be yourself, it can be a friend, it could be a family member, was lost their position, either a reduction in force, something happened. If they were impacted as a result of a layoff, put an exclamation point for me in the chat. It doesn't have to be you. It could be a partner, a friend, a family member. I'm just curious how many people on the call have had that happen in their circle. So we have a couple, a few, not as many as I would have thought, but especially given how many layoffs we've had here in the US. But there are specific things that happen when we experience a layoff, and that doesn't necessarily only mean if we were impacted. So there's this thing in the psychology called layoff survivors. And those are the people who remain after there's been a layoff in the organization. Now, our logical brain says, oh, well, we should feel lucky we have the job. We should, how can there be bad feelings about not having been let go? And, but the psychology shows us there are a lot of feelings about being in that survivor group. And we call those being, quote, in a fog. So that stands for experiencing some of these emotions when we are the remaining or survivors of the layoff. So feeling like an imposter syndrome is that feeling that you're going to get caught, that you're not qualified for the job you have, that somehow people expect something of you that you can't actually do, that you're an imposter. Negativity, seeing things through a negative lens. Our brains are already wired to do this, by the way. We like to say that our brains are Teflon for positive things, but Velcro for negative. We tend to focus on the negative, not consciously, subconsciously, because that's what our brains were designed to do, which is to keep us safe. Anger at some of the decisions that were made, anger at maybe how things were handled, anger at how they were communicated. Fear that there may be more layoffs coming. There may be other risks that could be coming up for us. Feeling overwhelmed because many times when there's a layoff, the work that those people were doing does not go away. It just tends to get reconsolidated. And so that can create a large feeling of overwhelm and unappreciation. And then guilty. Some folks will find that after a layoff, they find that they struggle with guilt. And because of these emotions are partially fueled by these emotions, research shows that following a layoff, between 8 to 12% of the remaining population will quit within a few months. And they call that layoff contagion. So if you are one of the people who put an exclamation point in, or if you were somebody who hasn't, but it still fits for you, be aware of the feelings that can happen when we are impacted, or not when the people around us are. All right. So those are just 3 examples of very common, well-documented causes of burnout that can happen in the workplace. And so you can see some of those here. But even if I experience that, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that I will become burned out. What it does is it shows an accelerant or a high risk for burnout. That's why we called that high risk for burnout. Things have to happen in the middle, those are squiggly lines. Things like our ability to cope, our personal history, the frequency with which we experience these, just, bad timing. Lots of things can happen that can ultimately lead to burnout. And when we experience burnout, there are 3 clinical symptoms that would tell us we are in burnout. One is exhaustion. You probably recognize that from the questions we did earlier. So feeling emotionally exhausted or physically exhausted is a symptom of burnout. Cynicism. This is that bitterness and distrust, that side eye that can come up when we start to feel burnout. And then the last one is cognition. So sometimes you'll see this referred to as performance, but basically the ability to execute and do the things we used to be able to do with ease, that starts to diminish as we experience burnout. So those are the 3 symptoms that would tell us that we may be in burnout right now. Now, what I want to do is, those were our general burnout risks, but there's been tons of research about folks who work in tech and folks who work in IT, et cetera. So for tech professionals, there's been a lot of research about what impacts the mental health and well-being in those spaces. And so I want to share 5 of those with you. And then we're going to talk about what to do about it. So this isn't just going to be a bummer. We're going to get to some ways that you can either bolster if you aren't there yet or at risk, or help you recover if you find that you are at risk. All right, so the first one is exhaustion, but that exhaustion, which we mentioned, that's a common symptom, but that exhaustion of constantly having to learn new things, et cetera, has been specifically connected to the tech industry. So there was a big report that came out last year called The State of Burnout in Tech, that some of these come from. But in that, they showed that 56% of tech workers feel exhausted at the end of the day. If you've ever felt exhausted at the end of the day, will you put an asterisk in the chat for me? I want to see if anybody else has ever had that experience. Okay. Reva's 3 times for Reva. Feeling exhausted at the end of the day, so Samuel, I'll answer your question. It's not bad per se if you have the coping skills to be able to recover adequately at the end of the day before you go back to work. So if this was a longer presentation, I had this video where a psychologist talks about kind of filling your balloon, right? Throughout the day, your balloon starts to deflate, and that's natural. But what we find is if we don't have coping mechanisms to refill that balloon, and we go to work the next day and the next day exhausted, that's where we put ourselves at risk of burnout. And yes, Yannick, you can't understand that anyone can go party or to the gym after work, right? We just don't feel like we have anything left to give. I'm going to give you some things you can do that will help you with that here in a minute. And sometimes it is that we struggle with letting go of the stressors of the day. We start to kind of ruminate and go through, this person said this, or I am tackling this problem. And sleeping on those is a great way we use our brains to help solve problems. However, we want to make sure we also give ourselves the space to recover. Again, I'll talk about that in the last few minutes of our session. All right, number 2 for tech teams is the pace of change. Things are coming fast and furious in this space. So we don't even know what life is going to look like 6 to 12 months from now. So many things are evolving and moving so quickly. And like I said, our brains were designed to take in a lot less information than they take in now. So that pace of change can increase our exhaustion, our ability to keep up, and can put us at risk of burnout. So I actually started my non-academic career as a change management professional, working on SAP implementations. And so that's been my background for a while. But we think about the typical change curve where we go through a change as we start to absorb that change, and we get into integration of that change. However, if we experience change after change after change and we haven't landed before the next one comes in, it's kind of like that undertow in the ocean, right? It's just going to pull us under. And so that's something called change fatigue, which is if we don't have enough time to recover, then we just get tired of changes and they don't get absorbed. And so here are some examples or some signs that you may be experiencing change fatigue. So one is to question the value of making changes at all. The next one, this is, I've worked for companies that have had this issue where it's just like apathy. Like, oh, I'm sure this is the flavor of the month, the week, the day, and we'll just wait for the next one. Information hoarding, feeling like, if I can hold on to this piece, maybe it won't change. Here's our good friend cynicism, the disbelief and distrust, an inability to make decisions because you don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. So that change fatigue can just wear us down. If anybody's experienced that change fatigue, or if any of these look familiar, put an @ sign for me in the chat. So that's feeling like you just can't keep up with all the changes. All right, not as much as the exhaustion. Okay, we've got 1 all. That's good. And this can be, especially if you have a lot of like what's called tech debt and you're trying to fix it and you've got problems that you can't chase after, it can create exhaustion, but not lately. Thank you, Angel. But think about others in your business, right? If you have to work with people who've experiencing change fatigue, that can make life more complicated. All right, constant threats, specifically in tech. So one of the companies I work with is a cybersecurity company. So cyber attacks are a big threat in that space, as I'm sure you can imagine. Here's what's fascinating about our brain. Our brain does not know the difference between something that is a physical threat or an emotional threat. In fact, the parts of our brain that fire off when we feel threatened are the same, whether it is a physical threat or what they call an emotional threat or a theoretical threat. So our brains experience it in the same way. And so research on people who work in cybersecurity, who handle cyber attacks, show that they have the same PTSD symptoms as people who have experienced physical attacks. So this was a study that looked at from Mimecast from last year. 54% attacks have a negative impact on mental health from people who went through the cyber attacks. 54% said that it impacted their mental health, and 56% feel like the work is getting more and more stressful every year. All right, number 4, people are messy. Okay, so we try to put in these processes which make a lot of logical sense, but they don't account for the hot mess that we are as humans. We are feeling creatures who also think. So our emotions are always there. Our biases are always there. I know there's another session actually going on right now, I wish I could watch, about this topic. So people are messy. So we come up with these transformation projects. We have technology, but the emotions and illogic of people can get in the way and really break things down. So here are some examples of the challenges. If we're implementing change, which many of us are, here are some of the challenges that humans can create because of how our brains work. One is processing time. If I'm someone who has been aware of the change for a while, and then I bring someone else in, I expect them to be at the same place as me, but they aren't. They need as much time to get on board as I had. And so that giving people the time to absorb the change is a big watch out for us. It takes time to try to absorb change. It is not a light switch. We can't just go from one color to the next, right? So that a lot of times we don't plan for how long that's going to take. We say, oh, I'm just going to tell them and they will know. Telling is a very ineffective way of actually getting people to change their behavior. It's proven over and over again. Speaking of which, transferring information, that makes a ton of sense to me, but now I got to train other people on how to do it. That also can be frustrating because not everybody learns the same way. And change is just in general uncomfortable. Like I said, our brains evolved to keep us safe. One of the ways we stay safe is by not making any changes. The unknown is scary. And we may not believe that or think that, but our brains are wired to behave in that way. And so this can create challenges for us as we're trying to implement changes. And a lot of our success is dependent on people, right? So if you look at the root cause analysis of most project failures, what is the norm? What is one of the most common ways in which our projects fail? Put your thoughts in the chat. By the way, according to PMI and other studies, 2 out of every 3 projects fail. And that's specifically also in tech. Thank you, Tobias. Communication, right? Communication is the #1 reason that projects fail. And that's because, again, humans are messy. Personality clashes, ego trips, power plays, all kinds of things can get in the way when it comes to our projects. And trust me, we don't plan for that. So that can be a specific stressor. Last but not least, on our 5 areas that are heightened burnout risks for folks in tech is imposter syndrome. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but especially with an ever-evolving space and ever-evolving tech, ever-evolving way in which we work, it can be hard to keep up and feel like you are the expert. And so imposter syndrome has actually been documented pretty accurately and frequently within tech teams. So, it's that little negative voice, right, as said here, that starts to give you that self-doubt. One study from Udemy from a few years ago showed that 87% of IT professionals across 5 countries did not believe that they had the skills necessary to be competent in their job within the next 5 years. So, yes, and Angel, having good processes changes a lot of chances of success, but not if we don't deal with the mess of people, right? So process will not replace having a conversation. It can force us to have a conversation, which is great, but having an effective conversation, communication, like Tobias mentioned, is often the underlying problem. So this was a survey that came out from 2018 that showed that 58% of tech employees experience imposter syndrome. I actually used to work for Intuit. I worked for Intuit for 8 years. And so, that was a while ago. But I've seen this imposter syndrome where we're trying to be something, but we're not really sure that we are that. All right. So we've spent 30 minutes on kind of a bummer ride. Apologies. So now let's spend our last 15 minutes together talking about what you can do. And there's a ton of research on what you can do. The things that I read thousands of articles and research studies on this topic. It's not just about what's bad. It's about what works to help remedy it, prevent it, mitigate it, etc. So there are 4 things that you can do that will help you balance and be able to bolster yourself against burnout. Angel, I see your yes, that survivorship mode. Yep, absolutely they do. So many burned out people. So we're gonna do something that maybe you might have mixed feelings about, which is creating resiliency. Now, this isn't shaming you because you don't have it. This is taking skills that have been proven to work through the data in peer-reviewed studies and giving you those tools for your toolbox, okay? So this isn't that you aren't resilient, it's that we're gonna add to your resiliency and the coping mechanisms you already have, because guess what? You made it to this webinar, you made it to this event, okay? So you've got some resiliency already. We're just gonna add to it. We're just gonna keep building the muscle, okay? So it's not a criticism, it's a benefit and an offering. And we're going to do this using something called neuroplasticity. So who's watching right now, who wants to toss in the chat what neuroplasticity is? Anybody want to take a run at defining what neuroplasticity is? Or if you're not up for it, just put an X in the chat if you've ever heard of neuroplasticity, so I know how much detail. Yes, thank you, Yannick. The ability for the brain to change. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So some of us have heard of it. So essentially it's this. We used to believe that the brain was fixed once it stopped developing, which is about our mid-20s. Once it stopped developing, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? This is what we used to believe from a neuroscience perspective. But now we know that through repetition, we can create new neural pathways, and it happens all the time. And there's different ways of small movements and small changes we can make that over time will create new neural pathways and new habits and new ways of behaving. So yes, ability for the brain to change. Thank you very much. So this is for us to form and reorganize new connections. So we're doing some brain science with the 4 things we're going to try now. So I'm going to give you these 4 tips that you can apply. Again, this is my speed run because I only have 45 minutes. But I use something called the YMCA. Bonus points. Who sang this song? Put that in the chat. Come on, where are my fellow Gen Xers? Let's go. Thank you, Tobias. Village People. That's correct. And now hopefully it's all in your heads. You're singing it right now. Starts with Young Man. Okay, so YMCA. Get that stuck in your head because that's what you're going to remember the next time you're feeling any of the things we just talked about, overwhelmed, exhausted, etc. We're going to use neuroplasticity to battle that. And here's what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on you. Talk about why in a second. We're going to do mindfulness, not meditation. We're going to practice some self-compassion, and we're going to practice some acceptance. These have been the most consistently proven tactics and skills that will help people be more resilient, cope during stressful times, and bounce back after they've experienced stress, losses, and even trauma. So these are 4 skills that you can take away and apply just today, starting now. So the first one is self-reflection. Now this is, you go like, what? That doesn't sound that hard. None of these are hard, actually. Self-reflection is just checking in with yourself. How am I doing? Right? Simple question. One research study showed that after 10 days of spending 15 minutes just checking in with themselves, participants in the study saw a 25% improvement in their overall well-being. So finding just 15 minutes every day to just check in and say, how am I doing? What am I feeling great about? What am I concerned about? What's happening? What's rattling around in there? We often do not spend time just checking in with ourselves. And when I ask people, and I talk about this topic a lot, why? The answer has often been because I'm afraid of what I'll find. So the more you can connect with yourself and who you are, the better you can perform and bolster yourself against potential risk of burnout. So just spend 1 minute today in the transition between sessions. Do a check-in. See how you're doing. It can be, that was a waste of time with that crazy lady talking about mental health. It could be, I'm doing great, right? Could be whatever it is. So that's the first one. Check in with you. Make sure that you take the time to do that. Today when you brush your teeth, tonight when you brush your teeth, spend that time thinking about how you're doing. You're not doing anything anyway. All right, number 2, mindfulness. Now I said not meditation. I'm a terrible meditator, but I do practice mindfulness. And here's the difference. Meditation is only one form of mindfulness. Meditation is focusing on our minds and watching our thoughts go by in a specific way. But when we think about focusing on just observing our thoughts with passive curiosity, it's very similar to self-reflection. We see study after study after study showing that it decreases our amount of stress and anxiety and all the things that can increase our risk of burnout. So when we can take that time to just breathe, focusing on your breath is a very simple way to practice mindfulness. In fact, let's do a quick exercise right now. And I can't see you, so if you don't participate, I will never know. But I'm going to demonstrate one form of mindfulness that can be very, very helpful. And that is something called box breathing. And there's a bunch of variations on this. There's apps, as you probably know. You can even go to the library and get a book on mindfulness if you want. There's visualizations on YouTube, tons of resources, okay? But here's one you can use if you're on Zoom calls all day or whatever the platform is you use. You can use your screen to help you be mindful. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our eyes to follow along the edge of the screen with our breath. So we'll take a big breath in, looking in the top left corner of your screen. And as you exhale, move your eyes to the right, to the top right corner of your screen. And then inhale and exhale as you move your eyes down to the bottom right of your screen. Exhale. Inhale and move your eyes down the bottom of your screen to the bottom left. Exhale totally, and then inhale. And we'll end our box by exhaling as we look up. And even that, just a few seconds, can help calm your nerves and give you that refilling and refueling that you need. So find a way that you can be mindful. Find your mindful way, and find a way that is meaningful for you. All right, 2 more. Again, these are not things I made up. This is what is in the literature from decades of research on workplace stress and burnout. The third one, which is my personal favorite, is self-compassion. Self-compassion is just speaking to yourself like you would a close friend, taking that negative self-talk and countering it with positive input. So when people practice self-compassion, it has a huge impact on not just their health and well-being, not just their ability to be resilient, not just their self-esteem, which is all shown in this study here, but also they make better teammates. They're better managers. They're better doctors. Because when we practice self-compassion, we activate the nurturing parts of our brain that then helps us connect more with other people around us. It gives us a more positive affect. So 3 ways you can practice self-compassion. Really, 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 for sure, practice kindness and kind talk to yourself. Most of us would never say the things we say to ourselves to other people. You deserve to be spoken to with kindness and not judgment. Let everybody else judge you. That's not your business. You are here to take care of yourself. Second, find a human to connect with. Find people you share information with. Find people who bring you joy. Make that human connection. When we connect with we are social creatures. We are not meant to be all by ourselves. So we can activate that positive part of our brain when we connect with others. And then finally, practicing mindfulness. Again, speaking to ourselves with kindness, checking in with ourselves, giving ourselves a pep talk every once in a while even. That's that self-compassion and self-care. Which takes me to my last one, which is acceptance. Now this, for our perfectionists and high achievers in the audience, may be a challenge. So if that's you, if you're very driven, put a P in there for me, for my fellow perfectionists. We want to do things right. Am I the only one? Okay, thank you. I'm starting to feel alone. All right. So perfectionism is a lot about control. And spoiler alert, we don't control much. Thank you, Fergal, 110%. I see you. So acceptance isn't putting our head in the sand and ignoring the things in the world and pretending like they're not there. It's understanding that life has ups and downs. We make mistakes every day. One research study showed we make on average 50 mistakes a day. Now, these might be big mistakes, small mistakes, whatever. We are not perfect. That is an impossible task. So what we have to practice is accepting what we can and cannot control. That's a big ask. Sounds simple, but think about all the things that you try to control every day that are not actually controllable. The opinions of other people, time going by. There's so many things that we try to control. And we even try to control how we feel. And we shame ourselves when we don't feel the way we feel we should. So practicing acceptance has been shown to help with that recovery and navigating difficult times, and also being resilient and bouncing back. So those are the 4 tactics you can use right now. Put in the chat, which one are you going to commit to trying? Are you going to do self-reflection? Are you going to try practicing some mindfulness? Are you going to practice some self-compassion and being nice to yourself today? or accepting something that maybe you're trying to control that you can't. Go ahead and put your answer in the chat. Thank you, Fergal, for doing that. Dick's an overachiever. He's going to do all. Thank you, Dirk. Yep. Thank you. I do love a self-compassion moment. Awesome. Great. Got some mindfulness. Just a breath, right? Do it between the spaces and sessions. You keep getting 15-minute breaks. Take that time. Thank you, Pavel, for doing the self-compassion. Appreciate that. Okay. So that puts me at the end of my time. I wanted to leave time in case you have questions. As I mentioned, I have handouts for all 6 of the areas that we covered earlier that put us at risk for burnout. If you want those, grab that QR code or just connect with me on LinkedIn. Or if you like, on the TikTok, because I am there, I'm Dr. Al Polizzi, or HR Big Sister. And with that, I will open up to see if there's any questions. And thank you so much for all of you who participated in the chat. It's always great to have that feedback and interaction.